I think you should focus on monetizing your podcast through your offers. So if someone listens to your podcast and then goes and books a high ticket coaching package with you, to me, that's monetizing your podcast. You just used a piece of content to create a new client. You need to have a content strategy that speaks to the different stages of awareness that your customer is in so that they feel like, I'm ready to book. Imagine an hour of storytelling where they're like, I feel like I know her personality. It's just very clear how she can help me. It actually eliminates a lot of needs for sales calls and discovery calls. You are literally using your voice to bring your business to life.
Hey guys, welcome to episode number 152 of the Game On Girlfriend podcast. If you have been thinking of starting your own podcast, this is the episode for you. If you already have a podcast and you're not quite sure how to keep it up, or if you're doing it well, or how you could improve it, you want to be listening. And this is going to be a big bucket of people. Are you sick of social media? Have you freaking had it? Would you like to throw social media into the garbage can? If that is you, you're also going to love this episode today. I really want you to understand you have all the power you need to get your message out there. And you don't have to rely on an algorithm. You don't have to dance and point at words that are on a screen. Please don't do that. You are a beautiful, strong business owner who has every right to express herself exactly the way she wants. And in case you can't tell, I am incredibly passionate about this. And so is today's guest. Chelsea is a mindset and podcast host. And what she really has a specialty in is helping people who are super creative and who really want to be self-expressed come up with a strategy and a plan for how to create this self-expression in such a way that they can monetize it, yay, that you can grow it and expand, but also really enjoy the process at the same time. Because we all know if you try to get out there and do something, we all have an energy at first, right? We get super excited. This is why so many of you listening, and you know, I love you. You have courses sitting on shelves that nobody knows about because you got super excited to create them, or you have products that nobody knows you have because you got super excited to create them. And then what happens? You burn out. And so what Chelsea really helps people do around podcasts is avoid that trap. And I really am so grateful that someone like Chelsea is out there helping so many other podcasters move through that space. Now, the next thing I just want to let you know, she does have her own podcast that is in the show notes. And if you're watching this on video, it is underneath the video where you can go check out her podcast. And she gave us all a special gift. If you are a Game On Girlfriend listener and you go review her podcast, she will give you a free consult. But before you go do that, can you pop in your earphones and let's listen to Chelsea kick some assets when it comes to podcasting. Chelsea, welcome to the Game On Girlfriend podcast.
Hello, I'm so excited to be here.
Can you just tell us a little bit about why this is what you do? Like, why the love of podcasting? Why the love of personality like this? I'd love to hear all about it.
I just knew I wanted to express myself in some way. My background is in broadcast journalism. I wanted to be a sports reporter. So I loved scripting things and writing and interviewing. Like that was always really interesting to me. But I quickly found out sports reporters are extremely undervalued in the industry, especially women. But I love writing and scripting and talking. So what other outlet is there? So after all those different attempts at blogging and Instagram and YouTube, I remember hearing a podcast and it just clicked like, this could be the thing because I don't have to be on video if I don't want to be. I get to make whatever I want. It could be a script, it could be a free flow, it could be an interview, and I get to talk about whatever I want for however long I want. And then in 2020, when the pandemic hit, I think everyone had this wake up call of like, you know, what am I really doing with my life? My corporate job was content marketing and influencer marketing and sales. So I was like, how can I use that and podcasting and all this knowledge I have in corporate America to do something with it? And eventually, after a bunch of different attempts at different types of coaching, I realized podcast strategy and coaching could really be something that I could help people with. I just realized the power of podcasting, the impact it had, how much it had affected my business, how it was helping others' businesses. And I was like, yeah, this is it. So now that is what I do. I am a podcast coach and strategist.
Oh my gosh, this is so cool. I'm like riveted. What do you think the biggest mistake is that people make when they launch a podcast?
Oh my gosh. Yeah. One of my favorite questions. I would say there's two big mistakes. Is the first is they have no strategy in place, no content strategy, a brand or a business I'm talking about specifically. So they're like, well, we know what we talk about on social media, so we'll just talk about it on our podcast. And then after 6 or 7 episodes, they're like, okay, what's next? I don't really know what to talk about. And then they get burnt out and they experience pod fade, which is a very real thing where they're like, we don't know what to talk about.
Oh,
We're just gonna like ghost our podcast. And then at least we say gave it a shot because there was no foundational strategy there. And they didn't think of all the different angles. And again, if you're a business or a brand, thinking of the stages of awareness and the content within those stages. So they're just kind of throwing things at a wall and seeing what sticks. And then again, because of no strategy, it's like it slowly starts to decline. The excitement goes away. And then they're like, we don't really want to have a podcast anymore. But again, at least we gave it a shot. We'll move on to the next big thing. I think the second thing is a lot of people don't have systems and organization in place, which also contributes to pod fade because as you know, it is such a big project. I mean,
mm,
every week, if you're doing a weekly podcast, you are you're doing so much. You're
yeah.
writing out the outline, you're asking questions, you're recording, you're editing, creating promotional materials. And if you don't have a system in place and you're like, whatever, I'll just figure it out week after week, you
Mm,
are going to hate it because you're going to be spending so much time trying to organize that you're using a lot of brain space where you could be doing other things. And that lack of systems creates resentfulness around podcasting. And a lot of people start to lose the excitement. So
wow.
that's what I see is people don't go into it with strategy or systems.
Wow. Oh my gosh, that's so interesting. I mean, I remember launching this podcast. It was an undertaking, man. Like, I was really stunned. I'm not afraid of hard work, and I was stunned at how much it takes. So that's really interesting. If we at least have a strategy and a system going into podcasting, what a difference. Would you recommend for businesses or companies or even brands or influencers to do series instead? Like maybe you do a 6-episode series and then 6 months later you do another. Is that a good strategy for a business, or is that not so great?
Yeah, I always say if I were to go back and start my podcast over, I would have done series or seasons, and you could do that based on however you want to. You could
Mm,
literally do seasons of the year, like a fall season, summer season, etc., or make themes. So this theme is all about health and wellness, and I'm going to interview health practitioners. Next month, it's going to be about dating, and I'm going to, interview dating and relationship experts, and make those your themes because it gives you those constraints. You need constraints for your creativity so if
mm,
you only have, let's say, 4 episodes, you're gonna be way more focused on filling those 4 episodes because you have those constraints of time and space. So you're like, okay, let me fill it with the best 4 interviews that I have or the best topics I can think of for those 4. And you're building in breaks. So you could do a season, build in a month break, prep for the next season, do it again. So yeah, I highly recommend anyone starting out, whether it's a business, an influencer, or a person doing it as a creative hobby, do
mm.
seasons or series and give yourself breaks.
Do you find when people do seasons or series, does it break the momentum of the podcast at all, or no, because it's based on topic?
No, because it's based on topic, and I think the more open and honest you are with how your podcast works, you won't lose your audience. So if you don't tell your audience that you're doing seasons or series and they think you do a weekly episode and you're gone for 2 months, yeah, they're gonna be like, "Well, I guess she doesn't podcast anymore. Let me take her off my queue." But if you're like, "Here's how the podcast works. Every month I drop a new season. Here's what's coming up," then you're gonna have a beautiful way to stay in touch with your audience.
But that goes back to the very first thing we talked about, which was the mistake people make is not even having that strategy. So they don't even know what to communicate, right?
Yeah,
So it
right.
really is that I call it the unsexy work that we all have to do, which is the work when no one's watching. It's the work when nobody knows what you're doing yet, but you are alone, strategizing, planning this thing out
Mhm.
so that when you do present it to the world, it's not a flash in the pan. It's not something people don't understand. And you're able to talk about it in such a way that people get like sucked in and excited and can't wait. I have to talk about social media because I don't think I have had a client or a student in any of my courses right now who doesn't come into the conversation and say, "Sarah, get me off social." And I'm like, "Okay, I got it. I understand why you want to do this." And so many people, I think even like we were talking about cereal, right? There's like this feeling like, can we go back to old school? Can we somehow get connected in a way that's not like, "Guys, I'm so great," and I'm pointing at words and like like, "Oh my god, I want out of this." Talk to us about the power of podcasting if one does wanna leave social media.
Yeah, well, I think the frustration with social media is we feel like we are putting so much energy, time-wise, investment-wise, everything-wise, like it's taking up so much of our schedule that we are expecting this huge return on what we put out there. And then we're like why are two people liking this when I usually get 100 likes? Or why does this only have one comment? Like, this idea felt really thought out and articulate. I don't understand. And it creates this toxic cycle where we start to get discouraged. And what happens is, because of the way social media is built to give you a bunch of dopamine hits with all the notifications, right? With when someone likes your story, if someone you know nearby might be following you, look at this new reel, constant dopamine hits. You start thinking, well, I just need to post more content. So then you make more graphics, more reels, more carousels, and then you just continue this hamster wheel where you're like, this is exhausting. What's going on? Imagine if you could take all your ideas, all the stuff you want to say, and then just talk about it on a podcast. Your voice is literally so impactful because you can hear your personality, your tone, your inflection. So it makes a much bigger impact than when you're scrolling and tapping and swiping amongst a sea of content. And you also have to think about the way people ingest that content. By the way, this is a fact that about 10 to 15% of your organic audience on Instagram sees your content, which means if you have 1,000 followers, about 100 people actually see it. And then it goes to more people if it gets engagement early on. Just a fun fact, I used to work in social media marketing. So I think that shocks people sometimes. Like, that's why your likes might be low. But imagine a world with podcasting where you don't have to worry about algorithms or who follows who. If someone downloads your podcast, they're getting it in their queue. So, Sarah, when you post a podcast, if I subscribed and you post
Mhm.
it every Friday, I'm getting it in my queue. You don't have to worry. "Oh, I hope Chelsea sees it and Julie and this other person." It's like, if they
Right.
subscribe, they are getting it. You are literally using your voice to bring your business to life.
Okay, so
Amazing.
this brings me to all of the little ears that I know perking up, going, okay, so now I get to express myself. I have to come up with a strategy, do the unsexy work, make sure I either choose a serial type of podcast, a series, or I do some sort of strategy around how long I'm going to be doing this. I'm communicating that out. How do I make money with a podcast?
I think you should focus on monetizing your podcast through your offers. So if someone listens to your podcast and then goes and books a high ticket coaching package with you, to me, that's monetizing your podcast. You just used a piece of content to create a new client. And this is where strategy comes in. I think the idea is people like me, my personality. So I'm just going to talk about whatever I want. I think that's great. That's how I started my podcast. But eventually I was like, okay, my podcast is a little too all over the place for the type of client I'm trying to attract. So I need to be more strategic. And this is where content strategy becomes really helpful. Here's an example. I have a client who's a medium, and she has been trying to sell her bookings and readings, and she keeps changing it and she doesn't know what to do. And her podcast is all about spirituality, and she has incredible topics, right? However, I noticed there was never a clear call to action, and people didn't understand that, like, you could do all these things by booking with her. So I was like, let's zoom out. What are people feeling when they want to book with you? They're probably feeling unfulfilled, or they need guidance or clarity. That's usually why people seek out spiritual mentorship. So we need to create a strategy that's going to funnel people into your services. So what we did was create this content plan that the first episode was like, how do you know if you're feeling unfulfilled? All of a sudden, she puts that episode out. People are tagging her in Instagram stories, they're sharing it, and they're like, oh my God, this is incredible. And now their wheels are starting to spin. Maybe I do need spiritual guidance. Maybe I do need to book with her. Oh, let me book a reading with her. So you need to have a content strategy that speaks to the different stages of awareness that your customer is in, so that they feel like, I'm ready to book, especially again, thinking of how they ingest that content. An hour of listening to you. Imagine if you had an hour-long sales call. That would be way too long. But imagine an
Right.
hour of storytelling where I feel like I know her personality. I'm not getting pitched at constantly. Like, it's just very clear how she can help me. I'm ready to book a reading with her. It actually eliminates a lot of needs for sales calls and discovery calls. So that's a really incredible benefit too. But yeah, I think we need to focus on monetizing our offers versus brand deals or sponsorships. Because if you think about it, if you have like 3 brand deals and then your own business, you now have like 3 mini bosses. Now I'm like, if you're a business owner, let's focus on your suite of offers. If you're an influencer, then we can focus on the brand deals. But I do think it's very clear to make that delineation, or else you're going to feel very scatterbrained and overwhelmed. And then again, you're going to resent podcasting because you're like, nothing's working. I don't know what I'm doing. And it's like, no, we need to kind of pick a lane and decide and build a strategy from there.
When someone's just starting out, or maybe they're in the middle, or maybe they're close to like burning out on their podcast,
Mm.
um, How do you like to go about collaborating with podcasts? And what do you recommend someone could do if they do want to reach out, or they're a little bit nervous about it, or they're not quite sure how to construct it, or they're like, oh, I'm too small?
That's such a big fear that my clients have is like, I want to pitch this host, but I don't have a big audience, or I want to guest speak in their course, but I don't have a big audience. This is where you need to understand the power of language, because if you can speak someone's language directly to them, numbers don't matter. This is where I think really doing your research and preparation helps incredibly. So let's say you want to guest speak inside someone's mastermind and it's a coach that has a much bigger following than you, huge email list, and you have like 5 episodes and 100 downloads, and you're like, I just know based on numbers. By the way, this is where social media becomes very mystifying, because it's like, yeah, they might have a bigger social media following, but their mastermind could be 4 people. So that's just something I want to like clear up. Don't look at social media as the truth of like what their clients and income is. So getting that out of the way, this is where you want to learn how to pitch. So let's say I'm a small podcaster. I have 5 episodes, only 100 downloads. Oh, by the way, 100 is a lot. And you have this sales mastermind coming up. I need to start racking my brain of how I can add value to your audience. I don't need to puff up my chest and talk about here's my skill set, and I have a master's in this and this and this and this. I need to speak to you so that you feel comfortable bringing me in your world and your audience. So if I wanted to collaborate with you, I would find a skill set that I have that I could again bring into your audience. So for me, it would make sense to talk to your sales mastermind about how podcasting can increase sales and
Right.
reduce your sales calls. So now to you, you're probably like, well, that makes a lot of sense for me. You don't need to really know about my numbers, right? Because we're talking about helping your clients. If you can add value to whoever you're collaborating with, instead of thinking of how can I make myself seem bigger, you don't need to worry about that. You need to be more specific with tailoring your pitch to who you're talking to. And then as an exchange, say, I would love to have you on my podcast. I would love to have you come speak to my mastermind. You need to speak the person's language and understand how you can add value to their audience and help them out and make their lives easier.
What do you think someone should ask themselves before they
Mm.
get started?
So I would just figure out how much, maybe start smaller than bigger. I always say that, start smaller, that you need to ask yourself, how much time do I want to commit? And what type of podcast do I want to do, so that I'm not overwhelmed? Because if you go into it kind of like both of us did, where we're like, woo, let's just figure it out. We're going to see what happens when we launch. That's when you can get overwhelmed, because you're like, I'm just going to do everything under the sun. If you have a full-time job, if you have kids, if you're taking care of people, it can be hard to do a weekly podcast. So just know there's other ways to do it. You could do bi-weekly, you could batch record. There's so many fun ways to get a podcast out there, but you do need to ask yourself your time commitment and the energy you have. But knowing that there's a way to make it fit into your energy and your time schedule as well. Yeah, I think that would be it. You need to be honest with yourself.
As we wrap up today, I believe you have a free gift for everyone who's listening today.
Yeah, actually, for your listeners specifically, because it's been such a fun conversation. If you write a review on my podcast, which is called In My Non-Expert Opinion, I will offer you a free 20-minute podcast consult. So if you want to talk about launching, monetizing, strategy, whatever you want, it can be about literally anything. I love to talk about podcasting, as you can see. So yeah, all you have to do is leave a review and you can get that 20-minute free consult.
All right. Well, of course, Chelsea, we will have a link to your podcast below. How else can people find you if they're interested in working with you?
Yeah, they can find me on Instagram. So it's at Chelsea Riffe. My last name is Riffe. And then my website is just at chelseariffe.com. And then, yeah, my podcast is In My Non-Expert Opinion. You can find that on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts.
Chelsea, thank you so much for stopping by the Game On Girlfriend podcast today. It's been such a pleasure to chat with you.
Absolutely. Thank you.